Reddit, what's your most satisfying revenge story? When I was in junior high, I used to hang out with these dudes during PE class. Then they turned into douchebags. They started bullying other kids, not participating in any of the activities, etc. I started getting in trouble just by hanging out with them, so I stopped. Of course, I was now a sissy. They would do things like try to push me while running track, gang up on me in sports, etc. Well, one day I opened my lunch to find my dessert missing. This went on for days, and I had no idea where it was going. I then saw one of the dudes eating it while laughing at the lunch table and shooting me knowing glances. I could have easily beaten this kid down, but I was never into physical violence. So I thought, and I schemed, and it hit me. The next week, I brought homemade brownies. Mondays were fine, Tuesdays were fine, Wednesdays were fine, Thursdays had a little surprise in them in the form of chocolate laxatives. While he was eating the brownie during lunch, I approached him. I told him I knew he was stealing my desserts and he should stop. "What are you going to do about it?" was his reply, to the laughs of his little cronies. I turned around and walked away. We found ourselves in PE class a bit later that afternoon. It was time for calisthenics. We did jumping jacks, sit-ups, stretching, and "Oh my God, what the hell!" was the scream from a girl a few rows over from me. Everybody turned and saw my bully crap his pants. So much! His entire gym shorts were soaked with brown liquid. It was going down his legs and was filling his shoes. He tried to run out of the gym, but he slipped in the poop water and got it all over his body and some on his face. For 2 weeks, he didn't come to school. While he was gone, the rumors started. Some said he died. Some said he was crapping blood. Of course, none of those were true. He was just so embarrassed, and he knew what he was coming back to. This happened in 7th grade. We parted ways after junior high when I went to private high school. However, I heard that the gym poop incident followed him through high school. No one would hang out with him. He became a social pariah. Now keep in mind, I had no idea it would turn out like that. I figured he would get stomach cramps and diarrhea that night. I had no idea he would end up taking a poop bath in the middle of the gym in front of everyone. But I didn't regret it. And I still don't. A woman rear-ended me pretty bad. She told me not to call the cops because she was on the way to an AA meeting and she would lose her license. She called her boyfriend instead, who was a lawyer, and he told me to let her go. Then he told me to come to his office and he would pay cash for all repairs if I brought in an estimate. I did as requested, but the lawyer laughed at me and said there was no proof and that I wouldn't get a cent. I was completely broke and I knew I couldn't afford the repairs. Plus, the car was not legally drivable as it was. One night, I went to the AA meeting via bicycle. She had said where it was in passing, and I checked the schedule. I confronted her on her way out. She confessed that her license was suspended, and she had been driving without a license that day. Since it was summer, I had days free from class and rode my bicycle to the lawyer's office for a few days to learn his schedule from across the street. Slowly, a plan for revenge took shape in my mind. When I knew his beautiful car would be unattended for a while, I filled his gas tank with sand and sugar. Loads of it. At the time, I lived in a bad neighborhood and there were always abandoned cars around. I had taken the rear plate off on one car with an expired tag and put that on his car. Next, I slashed all 4 tires with a small slit so the air would slowly be gone by the time he was leaving. Now, I was only able to see the first part of my plan from my perch. He came out from his office, saw the car sitting low to the ground, and started screaming like a banshee. He pays to get the car towed, they replace the tires, and he drives off. The engine fails eventually because of the sand and sugar, tows it again, pays for repairs, drives off, and is pulled over for expired plates. Since he arrogantly never took my information and never even looked at the repair estimate, he didn't know the name of his saboteur. I actually didn't tell anyone about this when it was going on. My girlfriend would not have approved. About a year later, I drove by the office and saw that it was no longer his. I feel like the woman probably would have done the right thing, but she was just mixed up with a jerk. Hopefully, the events I started made it clear to her. Sweet, sweet, secret revenge. When I was 21, I had just moved to a new city into a townhouse-style apartment with some friends of mine. We all had jobs at a tire factory and as such, worked shift work. When we moved in, we were given very explicit parking spots that were conveniently unmarked. These parking spots were not in front of our townhouse and were a few buildings down. Fast forward a few months, the king of douchebags moves in a few doors down from us, right behind our parking spots. This guy was a real jackass. One time, I overheard him making fun of our neighbor's daughter with severe cerebral palsy about how it must suck to be ugly and knowing nobody would ever want to touch you. Anyway, my roommates and I were working nights between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m., so we generally slept the days away. It was early spring, all the snow was melting, and the city issued some signs saying that the streets had to be cleared so they could clean the gravel garbage from the winter months. Our parking spots weren't on the street. They were in a parking lot place off the street, so we parked and went to sleep like normal. We wake up, do our regular routine, and boom, all vehicles are gone. We do some calling around and find out they were towed, so we go through the hassle of finding a way down there, paying the fees, and getting our vehicles back. Between the cab rides, tow fees, tickets, and a few missed work hours each, this ended up costing us about $500 each. Douchebag ends up telling us in passing the next day how he forgot to move his cars, so he called the cops and reported that he couldn't park off the street because somebody is illegally parked in his spot. Turns out the police ran our plates, got our address, which was just down the street, and apparently tried ringing the doorbell, which none of us heard because we were all sleeping, so yeah, we were pretty pissed about all of this. We had a few conversations on how we could get back at this asshole. One night, we came up with this. Jackass had a pretty decent girlfriend. I'm not really sure why she was with him. Maybe he was nice to people who slept with him. Regardless, we followed his schedule for a while. His girlfriend was out of the house at the same times on the same days, from Tuesday to Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. We staged a few fake pizza deliveries, and this dude never answered the door if she was home. One Monday that summer, we called an escort service. We told this chick exactly what to say in certain situations, etc. It took about 2 hours of coaching and going through mock situations, but it played out flawlessly. It did cost us $100 an hour for 3 hours. We send her over there, she knocks, and as expected, the girlfriend answers. When the girlfriend opened the door, the escort, with a stunned look, says, "Oh crap, is Tuesday tomorrow?" The girlfriend then started questioning why some skank is coming around, but we gave this chick answers to everything. She started talking about how she's been coming every Tuesday for months. Things start getting louder. Dickhead is at the door at this point saying stuff like, "Baby, I have no idea what she's talking about." Here's the kill shot. The escort starts talking about the dates she came over when the girlfriend was out of town. Nothing a random person would know. After they started yelling at each other, the escort left, blowing off the situation. There's no way any person, let alone the douchebag she was arguing with, would admit to seeing an escort every day for months, so he was pretty much screwed. They were shouting at each other for a good 10 minutes before they took it indoors. She moved out by Friday. Mission accomplished. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. For years and years in elementary school and most of middle school, this one kid would just bully me constantly. Towards the end of 8th grade, it had gotten pretty bad, and I really just wanted it to end. Let's call him Chris. When looking for a lost parrot on my property, I found the bottom half of some animal, may have been a groundhog or something similar, under a tree and brought it back to the house. I then called my mom, who was out of town traveling at the time, how I'd go about making it stop from stinking. This was before you could just Google things. She wouldn't really help me because I wouldn't tell her why I wanted to disinfect a dead rodent, but I let it sit out in the sun for a few days, and that killed most of the bugs and whatnot. I then wrapped it up in butcher paper and put it in a paper bag. I then wrote, "Dear Chris, you forgot your lunch this morning. Love, Mom." Chris always brought a bagged lunch into school every single day. In the morning after the first class period started, I went to his locker, no one locked theirs, and put it in there. After the first period, you could hear the screech from the floor below. Along with everyone else, I ran towards the sound and saw Chris walking down the hallway sobbing. I didn't do much to hide the fact that I did it, and I was given a day of in-school suspension. The principal didn't find the humor in negotiating for a half day since it was only half a rodent. Chris never really messed with me after that. When I was in 4th grade, we took a class trip to the symphony and I loved it. If you've ever heard a live symphony, then you know how amazing it sounds. I'd never heard something that awesome before. and was so excited that I turned to my friend next to me and made a comment. Something like, "Wow, this is totally rad." Well, two girls were sitting behind us and they complained to the teacher, saying that my friend and I had talked through the whole performance and ruined it for them. My buddy and I got in some serious trouble for that, and we had to sit in detention for several recesses. Detention was super boring. No talking, no reading, you just had to sit there. With nothing else to do, I plotted my revenge. The next week, I brought some chocolate-flavored X-Lax to class. I apologized to the girls for being such a terrible disturbance during the symphony and offered them the chocolate just before class got started. First hour passed without any action, but in the middle of math, things got interesting. It's important to say that our teacher was an old-school authoritarian and had a very strict hall pass policy. Only one student out at a time. As the girls started to squirm and act uncomfortable, I told my friend to take the hall pass. Almost immediately, the girls' hands went up, asking to use the bathroom, but the teacher said no go, as my buddy had the hall pass. They squirmed and pleaded and begged, and still our teacher wouldn't let them go. And then, that magical moment I hadn't dared hope for happened. In the middle of reviewing our multiplication tables, the girls crapped their pants. Everyone in the class nearly died laughing, and after a few seconds nearly died gagging. It was soon revealed that I was responsible, and I was sent to the principal's office. My family was threatened with criminal charges, but the months of teasing that those two little chits endured made it worth it. A few years ago during the summer, I was riding my bike to a friend's house along a fairly dead road. When I say dead, I mean road in a newly developed neighborhood, which got only local traffic and people on bikes or on foot. Being that there was no sidewalk to ride on, I was well off to the right of the road. But some dickhead decided it would be fun to tailgate a bicycle while driving a Mustang. As I panicked and pedaled faster, he just kept speeding up and slowing down and revving his engine until he accidentally nudges my tire, causing me to fall off of my bike. He comes to a full stop for a moment and speeds off shortly after. Knowing that it's almost always local traffic that goes through that area, it wasn't too hard to find out where he lived. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I ended up at his house at 4 a.m. with a large water bottle full of cement mix. I turned on his neighbor's hose and filled his gas tank to the brim with water, then dumped the cement mix into the remaining room left around the cap. To this day, that Mustang is still sitting in his driveway with a for sale sign on it, and he's now driving an even shittier Corolla. Years ago, my wife and I lived in an apartment in Johannesburg. The block consisted mostly of elderly folk and a few young working couples like me and my wife, who generally hit the sack early. The place was like a morgue after 10 p.m. That is, until a couple of guys moved into the place below us. They were the party types who would whoop it up till dawn. If anyone complained, they'd quickly get threatening. The owner of the apartment was one of the guys' dad, so they had no fear of being kicked out. One evening around midnight, they hooked up with some mates and girls to go clubbing. They were outside on the road, talking and yelling. Eventually, they depart. I was furious, but being a 90-pound wimp, I felt helpless. Then I remembered the tube of superglue in my desk drawer. I went to their flat, which had a serious security gate protecting the front door. I put the glue nozzle into the gate lock, a heavy-duty bolt lock, and squeezed the sucker dry. A couple of hours later, while lying in bed, I hear the party guys arrive back. Same deal as when they left. Made a lot of commotion as they spill out of their cars and head for the apartment. And then, silence. Later, I hear them breaking a toilet window and getting in that way. The girlfriends, of course, were having none of it, so they buggered off, as did the mates. The next day, they had to get in a locksmith who used a blowtorch to cut the lock out of its steel casing. This damaged the door behind, so both the gate and door had to be replaced, along with the bathroom window. Because these boneheads did not have the money for all these, the dad who owned the apartment had to pay. He was so pissed off that he kicked out the roommate. From then on, it was the quietest flat in the building. I guess it's not really revenge, because I didn't inflict this fate on this person, but this ex-popular girl who bullied me from middle school to high school for having a scoliosis brace came into the credit union I work for to get help for her debts that she couldn't afford to pay back. She was overweight, dressed like a washed-out starlet, and financially screwed. I straightened my suit, took her into my office, and helped her with consolidation loans. I could tell she wanted me to say something about our past, but I didn't. Sometimes the best vengeance really is living better and showing those people who hurt you that they are just a passing blow. Also, like I said, she was already screwed anyway. A shitty repair shop in Moab, Utah messed up our car, which left us stranded in a nearby national park. We called and demanded they tow the vehicle in, and while they said they'd come get us, they never did. When we talked with park rangers, they were quite familiar with the shop. It's the biggest in town, and with a terrible reputation. We were on our honeymoon and had more time on our hands than I imagine most travelers do. So we went to the shop and demanded a full refund. When they refused, we sat out front on the curb in our camp chairs for 2 days with homemade protest signs. I was overwhelmed by the support we got from locals, who honked and waved, stopped and chatted with us, and shared their own stories of horror. The owner called the cops on us, but the joke was on him. We already notified the police that we would be protesting, and we are well within our rights in doing so. In the end, the shop owner refunded all our money and left visibly distressed when we told him that even with the refund, we weren't sure we were ready to leave town. Eventually we did, but not before filing complaints with the Better Business Bureau and every review site we could find. They'd already been booted from the Chamber of Commerce. We ended up becoming friends with an awesome local mechanic and having a great story to tell. Justice was served, and without a tinge of guilt. I got to dispense a little justice to my neighbor once. I met the neighbor sitting outside, shining boots. He was in the Army National Guard. I walked over to introduce myself, and we talked a bit about the Army. I helped him shine his boots and pulled a couple of beers out of the cooler that I kept in the back of my truck. Fast forward a few months, and I'm silently wondering if I'm an alcoholic. The case of beer that I bought the day before yesterday had dwindled to a 6-pack, but I shrugged it off. I drove my wife's car to work one day that week. My wife worked in a shop across the street and phoned me to tell me that she had been watching the neighbor climb into my truck and stuff his pants with my beer. At first, I was going to confront him and demand restitution, but I decided that I could avenge my missing cans of beer by switching to bottles. So I switched, and when they were empty, I refilled them with, let's just say, recycled beer, and recapped. I put them in my cooler and waited patiently. A few days went by and some of the beer went missing. I waited. Nothing else was taken again. My point was made. I knew a kid who was an absolute terror. He would just be a douche for the sake of being a douche. One day my friends and I were at the park playing football, and this kid ran up to us with a paintball gun and shot us all up at the park. Now we have paintball guns too, so if we wanted to shoot him up we could, but we knew it wasn't enough. This time this kid went too far. Since he lives near us, we know his family quite well. We know that his mom is crazy controlling and mean as hell. We also knew for a fact that he did not have a paintball gun before, so he must have finally convinced his mom that he would be responsible with it, and she finally allowed him to buy one. Well, we took all our paintball guns and shot up every house on his block, except for his. His house is within viewing distance of the park where we play football, so we all got to watch and laugh as his dad was outside slamming his gun against the street and apologizing to the neighbors. He was crying like a baby and it was glorious. I know this sounds mean, but if you knew this kid, you would know how badly he deserved it. When I was 11 years old, I was bullied by a 12-year-old boy. He would steal things from my lunch every day. I got sick of it and decided to do something about it. One day I brought a super hot pepper in my lunch and pretended to be really excited about it. Sure enough, the boy comes over, snatches it from my hand, and pops it in his mouth. He practically exploded in pain, writhing around the floor, unable to handle the heat. I calmly looked at him and told him that drinking a nice glass of cold water would help immensely. He did so. This promptly magnified the pain 100 times. He never stole food from me again. When my grandparents were younger, they lived in flats, and the woman in the flat below them, nearest to the post box, would always read their letters. My granddad knew because he could tell that she was resealing the glue over her kettle. So one day, he decided to send a letter to himself, but he included a strand of black hair from my grandma. The woman below, having the same color hair, would pick it out, thinking it was hers. With this, he also included a note saying, "Stop reading our letters, you nosy c***." Needless to say, their post was never opened again, and he never received that letter back. At my school, we had a bully who liked to stand next to his locker while talking to his friends, and when someone got too close to it, he'd slam it open into their face. As there were no cameras near this hallway, it was always dismissed as an accident. Anyway, one day he felt the need to open it into my best friend's face. It gave him a bloody nose and almost broke it. Now, as I'm sure you all would be, I was pissed off. So the day my friend got back, the douche felt the need to approach him to apologize for hitting my friend. He was being sarcastic. Luckily, my locker was located between my friend and the other kid. When I saw I could do it, I casually unlocked my locker, waited for him to get close to it, and slammed it into him. It broke his nose and dented the locker. Revenge is sweet. This may seem small, but it was the most satisfying thing I have ever done. When I was in the 7th grade, I sat behind a jerk who hated me and enjoyed being annoying. Every single day, he would lean back in his chair and hit the front of my desk, over and over again. If I was trying to write something, he would do it even harder. One day, I decided enough was enough, and in the middle of a lesson, he started again. So I waited, and right as he was leaning his chair back, trying to knock my desk, I pulled it back. Without my desk behind him, his chair tipped right over, and he hit the ground hard. I can still clearly remember him whispering, "You bitch!" beneath the laughter of the whole class and the teacher yelling at him to get up. The look on his face was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and pure rage as he looked up at me from the floor. Bastard never messed with me again. Revenge is an art form. It has an impact and is needed to keep the karma revolution going. Here's my situation. In college, I had a crazy neighbor. She would call the cops on us and even made me and my roommates go to mediation over nothing. We never knew she had an issue with us. Never ever called me. Never even hinted at any issues she had with us. So after making our lives a living hell, dealing with the cops on a daily basis from anonymous calls and ridiculous allegations, I decided to take some revenge and make her life a living hell as well. I went to a nearby record store that had magazines and took out all of the subscription postcards out of every magazine, about 270 to be exact. Then I went online and had labels made for my neighbor's address. I got all my roommates together, and while drinking a few beers, we pasted her address to all the magazine subscriptions and checked the Bill Me Later box. I hope you can imagine what happened next. It took her over 2 years to unsubscribe to all, although I think she gave up. She would have to write letters to each magazine provider and then credit her if she missed payments. Lo and behold, she moved. To this day, magazines still come to that address. A few months out of college, I got a job working in the courts. Not long after I started, I was perusing the docket and saw the name of the kid who made my life a living hell in middle school. Turns out he'd been caught selling coke out of his basement. In my job, I only deal with victim-oriented crimes, but I didn't have any hearings for the next hour, so I decided to sit in. I was standing at the prosecution table when he came in to be sentenced. I turned around, caught him eyeing me, and simply said, "Hey Mike, how've you been?" He didn't say anything, just lowered his gaze to the table, looking dejected. As the judge took his place on the bench, I walked back to the gallery and watched my former tormentor get sentenced to 2 years in the state pen. There's a saying that the greatest revenge is to live well. I came to truly appreciate its wisdom that day. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel for more Reddit stories. This is Reddit Story Hour. See you in the next video.